In this video, we're going to take a look at my texturing process overview. So before I even jump into Painter and start going at it, I tried to make a plan of how I want to surface the object. And so this is my reference board that I had. I also owned the actual knife and had it in front of me, had an electric microscope that I could take a look at really close, which had its benefits and its drawbacks. But what I do is I try to break up the object into the different parts that I want to kind of highlight. And so you can see that here on the board. I also will just take a look at other things that are similar on parts or damage or wear, just so I can better understand the surface. So one of the key references I used were some of these knife references that I found on eBay. So eBay is again, a really great reference for finding items that are used for sale. And generally the pictures end up being really good. And a brand new factory new object just frankly isn't that interesting to look at. And it's not that fun to texture either. So this one here kind of became my go-to reference for how I wanted to treat the blade. And then I think I also reference this one. Like, this had some cool stuff, like you can see the change in the value here in here. So yeah, so I start organizing them together and start just making a plan of what details or what surface properties I want to express. And the way that I do that is like this. So this is from the 80 level article that I published back in December. And this is something that I would advise you to do. Is I have three kind of core concepts I try to keep in mind while I'm building my texture, and I have my references and my notes because if you're like me, as you get into the weeds and start building up the textures, sometimes you lose track, of what the objective was. And so my three kind of areas to look out for are these. Readability is more important than realism. The second is visual consistency. And then the last one is storytelling. And all three of these things are, they're interconnected. And so what I did is I broke up the main asset into three, you could say four major parts. Like, you would also kind of count the hardware, which is like, it's kind of wrapped into like the clip. Okay, so, but if you want to separate that and say there's four, there's also hardware, that's fine. So the first main element is the blade, and then we have the handle, and then we have the clip. These are the three that I want to talk to you guys about. And the interesting thing with this, like, we can see the difference in the color value here. The material just wasn't all that interesting, right? And I just got done texturing the fire hydrant, which was literally just red paint on metal, like the whole thing, right? And so I did some things in that fire hydrant to kind of make different parts of it just be visually more interesting. So the hat and then the caps that are on the edge of the fire hydrant, at the ends of the fire hydrant, are slightly darker red, a little less saturated, etc. So just to get them so they can pop out, right? And kind of, but still fit together. The blade and the handle on this knife is basically, think of it all as like a matte painted metal on a surface. And they're fairly within reason, fairly close in the value, right? Like, so this is I got black to work with and gray. Not a whole lot to work with in terms of color. And so here's some things that I wanted to take note on in terms of readability. Is one, I wanted the separation between the handle and the blade in terms of color to really be distinct, and the same with the hardware and the clip and stuff like that. And so what I did is I wanted to limit their ranges in terms of color into specific value ranges, and then also use roughness, and then also noise patterns. Let me explain. So while you'll start to notice very similar elements across your asset, so like here we can see the way this is chipping. So one thing that I made note of was, if I'm going to damage the blade damage is going to be sharp it's going to be straight and direct. Okay, so you can see the way the blade for the most part is damaged. For the handle, I was going to be more of a chipping effect, and you can see that here, and it's going to be irregular and like sporadic. It's still around like where it gets used, but you can see it gets dinged and it's sporadic, and here I want more slicing lines. I hope that makes sense. And then with the clip, you can see right here is a good way to look at this. This is very like on and off, like pretty crisp. Here it has like a burnishing effect from like rubbing up against fabric. So even though here you can see this is much more like that, I limit kind of the way that it's worn per asset so each one reads distinctly. Okay. Another thing that I noticed is, both from opening it up, the blade had fingerprints on it as well as the handle. In the end, I ended up deleting most of the fingerprints that were on the blade just because it got too busy and it wasn't readable. But it became a point of interesting visual interest that is pretty distinct to the handle. So, I'm giving area for the texture to go. So there's really three ways that I break up my surfaces in readability. One is I do that with color ranges and some contrast, and then limit noises. So here I have, like milling and anistropic noise. Even if this had an anistropic noise on here, I wouldn't use it. But here I kind of captivated like the Brownian type noise that you can see in here, or cloudiness. Then here I did anistropic. So we got like milling, flat lines, Brownian, and then horizontal instead of vertical. So that's number one. Number two is the visual consistency. Now, if you've UV'd your stuff, you should have even textile density from your UV map within reason. Usually things like these bolts and things like this, if it's possible, I'll give them about 20%, 25% extra UV space or textile density. It's not going to look blurry. The other textures aren't going to look blurry, but there's something that's going to be noticed to the player, and I need the extra details to kind of get those edges right. But what I mean by like consistency really is that you'll see this artist will have something that has high frequency noise, and then they use the wrong scale of noise or detail on another object. Like everything will look great, and then next thing you know, you have this really big scratch or something across the surface that's been stamped in or used with the generator, and it just doesn't match the scale. So make sure you're using the correct proportions and back and forth. One thing that I like to do is, as things sit in, I use dirt to kind of settle stuff in. That's how it happens naturally. But dirt and things like kind of like dust and hair is a universal element that crosses globally across the asset. So I use dirt to kind of ground stuff and then also blend it in and add some continuity in scale from one to another. So it wouldn't make sense if you had dirt here that was big and blobby, and then over here is like fine dust, right? So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so here, just take a look at that. I highly recommend that you do the same, and your assets will read collectively and uniformly, but also the individual parts of the asset will be visually interesting. And then the last thing is to wrap this all together, like, well, where do you put these? It's storytelling. How is the object used, and how would it, where would it, these things happen? Again, frequently I'll see assets that are created and somebody will just, use a generator and then not clean it up or a stencil. And it's kind of all over the place. So you got to pick and choose. If I'm doing a hero asset, I'm being very, very deliberate about it. I understand if you're in a main production, you might have some more automated tools that are procedural. You might not have complete control over where everything is going to land, but you want to be careful that it's not going to look unnatural. Okay, let's go to this next slide here. So for readability with things, you can see that this is not PBR correct, right? Not by any stretch of the imagination. And so what I'm doing here is that I've broken up the surfaces, the main kind of planes of it, to have a little bit different contrast. So when light is, in high frequency light or low, you can still visually see the forms. And here it's a little bit less distinct in the handle, but this is still a little bit lighter. And then the roughness, this is a lot rougher in the base than the flat parts. And that's so light will catch on these surfaces and it'll really pop up. Okay, so those are those things that I wanted to show you guys as you get in and you start planning your things. I'll just take a look at this one as well if you're still with me. This is a kind of a gradient chart of showing base color and roughness. Here, these are clamped out. Okay, I understand in PBR, in a PBR workflow, you have things are either a metal or a non-metal, and this is very deliberate because then you could just have a mask. It's either there or it's not there, or you can just stick in a flat value and it's more effective, right? However, it's important that you understand how PBR works, and then you can artistically tweak it within ranges so it's still correct-ish, but you get the visual look that you're going for. These parts that I X out is like I'm never going below, like 0.9 on my darks, because then it's just going to read as like a flat black. There's going to be like no information there. And then on the lights, it's even more room, because when light hits the surface, this will just read like nothing is there on the surface as soon as light comes across it. In roughness, you can see I do a similar thing. And by kind of keeping everything like in like these ranges, I have lots of room to play with, right? So the main surfaces between the blade, which is like here, and the handle, it's all kind of crunched in a 30-ish range, right? And then the roughness too, right? That allows me, when I'm starting to layer my my texture, I kind of have a little bit of a break, and then here's where my dirts can reside. Here's where my wear, here's where my oil and do damage. So it doesn't need to be overly shiny. It doesn't need to be overly matte, and things don't need to be overly hot, etc., etc. With the metal, I typically never go above a 0.87, if I remember correctly. And so just take a look at this. So let's just jump into Painter, and let me just show you something real quick. I'm going to do a new material, and let's just go ahead and kind of make this dark, right? And let's go ahead and make another new material and add a black mask. And on this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on the roughness and the metal, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and turn the metal all the way up, right? And we'll just start with the base roughness here. And let's go ahead and add a paint layer. Okay, so this probably doesn't look too bad, right? But if we come over here and, we take this and we move it around, let's take what happens when we move the roughness up. Look at what you're seeing. It wasn't so obvious if it was down here, but so this is why it's important to understand how these values behave. If you have something that's completely metallic and it's super rough, that's highly unlikely. You get this haloing effect around the transition, right? Okay, now let's say it's super shiny, right? Like a mirror finish. One, you're probably never going to see it like this, right? But again, you're seeing this haloing effect between the transition. Okay, so if I just go ahead and just make it so it's not quite a mirror finish, okay, not so obvious, you can still kind of see it. And let's just go ahead and take this down to, like I said, maybe it's 8.7. Okay, it's not possible to, get away, remove it completely. But you can see by tweaking these values here, we get a much cleaner result. Okay, we can come in here and change this if you guys like. Let's go to like something hard, like a hard brush. Okay. So again, you can see little haloing effect. Crank it up. There it is, right here, right? So again, bring this down, .875 is what I use. And so those are the things I'm looking at that are just going to clean up the textures in those transitions. And of course, if you're doing anything that's like a hybrid or something that's oxidized, it's going to rest somewhere in between. So understanding how these three maps kind of play off each other. If I have something that is, more shiny, right? Like it's, metallic, and shiny roughness. And then I come in here and I want to change this, like say you're doing your oils, right? If I'm doing my oils like this, generally you wouldn't have anything. But what happens is if you have no value here, I can move these down, right? And just by making this a little bit darker, I can make my oils. So, in here, I just go back to base color and say, hey, let's just have it a little bit. And put it a little bit in the color, a little bit, it's technically a not mel, but something like right here, roughness right here, and you're gonna get like a really nice, oily effect. And just come in, smudge it a little bit, and there you go. So again, I hope this is helpful when you're planning your asset. If you're like me, I go in with a battle plan. I'll do that in the next video, do the block out with you guys. And then it starts to get messy. So it's best to have a plan and stay organized. And so you kind of know what you're building through, and you can have a little bit of process. So I like a little bit of process to guide me. And then at the end, I am still trusting my artistic eye. Is it what it's supposed to look like? And does it look good? Again, readability, visual consistency, and storytelling. We'll see you in the next